I can talk a little LP politics because there's
What's that?
Libertarian Party. There's some interesting
Oh,
stuff
yeah,
going on
okay.
because it looks like either an anarchist or Bill Weld will be the candidate for the Libertarian Party.
For which?
President.
Oh, they're deciding it this early?
No, they decided it in 2020, but they're the two front runners.
Okay.
Because Weld is the party leadership favorite, and Kokesh has been picking up delegates since like 2017.
Wait, who's Kokesh?
The anarchist.
Oh.
Adam Kokesh.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You
His
were
whole
talking about him last
platform
time.
his whole platform is dissolving the federal government
Well,
through executive order.
if he gets into the what's it called? Like the party leadership, if he gets a nomination, I won't be voting Libertarian, unfortunately.
I might write in someone at that point.
Yeah.
Write in Ron Paul.
I think if Austin Peterson wins his whatever he's doing now,
Senate seat.
he should run for president after that, because then he'll have more name recognition.
Yeah, honestly, I hope Rand Paul challenges Trump this time.
Oh, definitely. If Trump gets the nomination, I don't know what the hell I'll do.
Did you hear how people are responding to Rand Paul filibustering the other night?
How are they responding?
A bunch of representatives are like basically saying "fuck you."
Well, yeah, he called them a bunch of hypocrites, so.
Well, the one guy was like, "Now I understand why your neighbor beat you up."
Jesus Christ.
No, so Rand Paul didn't want to be the only hypocrite in Congress. So he, for those of you who don't know, he filibustered the budget process, the budget bill, a couple nights ago, till about 1 in the morning. And that caused the Senate to close after he was done, which means they can not vote on a budget the night before the government shut down.
Yeah.
So he single-handedly forced a government shutdown, speaking for a few hours, which, by the way, he single-handedly shut down the federal government. His libertarian credentials are redeemed, at least in my view, because before there were some shaky incidences where he said that basically libertarians are half-naked people smoking weed. So he redeemed himself, which means that I will probably support him if he runs again in the Republican primary, hopefully challenging Trump. Because if anyone other than Hillary Clinton runs for the Democrats, then Trump will lose. That is, I'm going to call it right here and now. So,
Well, you could run someone who's like politically close to Hillary Clinton.
Okay, you know what I meant.
Elizabeth Warren, or
Elizabeth Warren's fairly progressive.
maybe Tim Kaine or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've
Tim
always seen
Kaine
Warren as just like a Clintonite that pretends to be a progressive. But
Well, it's basically every government progressive ever.
except for Bernie Sanders, he was legit until he wasn't.
Except for Bernie Sanders and his 3 homes and his potential money laundering wife.
Oh yeah,
Potentially. I'll say that.
allegedly.
Yeah.
Yes, allegedly.
I don't want to be throwing out exact 100% fake information. So I will say allegedly.
But yeah, the GOP, like 5 years ago during the Obama administration, when the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate and all that, they were just deficit hawks. They didn't want to spend any money. They wanted fiscal conservatism. They just wanted to make sure that the nation was being responsible with our funds, and we have lower taxes and all that. And back then I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's just not spend money. But then when they control the government, it's like, big government if it's our government, you know? And then I guess
it's always been the case. We're just naive.
I guess Rand Paul didn't want to be a hypocrite, so.
Well, he did vote to cut taxes by $1.5 trillion tax revenue over 10 years, so $150 billion a year. And he voted to not increase the budget by $700 billion a year, I believe.
I was actually against the tax bill, because if we're spending tons of money and not getting that in revenue, then How are you getting the money to spend? Well, you're going to increase the deficit. And debt is just deferred poverty, which is what Stefan Molyneux likes to say. And I think that...
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you there, because even liberal economics put us on the wrong side of the Laffer curve. Our tax rate is so high, we literally bring in less money. So cutting the tax rates will bring us more money over time. This is just, I'm using predictions done by, I think, the CBO, I believe, so...
Well, maybe, but didn't most economists say that this tax bill would actually lose us money?
Obama's head of economics, I forget what she was called. I don't think she was the secretary. She is an advisor. Obama's head economics advisor literally said our tax rates are on the right, aka the wrong side of the Laffer curve. And now that they're saying it's going to bring us less money in because they don't agree with the policies of the Republican Party, so...
I don't know. I'm just very wary about...
But yeah, I agree with you.
Deficit.
You can't just cut taxes without cutting spending. I agree. But I was happy.
It's like I would much rather have high taxes now and no debt than low taxes now and high debt, because really you're just forcing higher taxes on the future generation.
Austerity doesn't work, bud.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you. Someone should tell that to the Conservative Party in the UK.
So tell us more about the UK. What's going
on? Okay, so we've got Brexit obviously going on, 20 millionth round of negotiations or whatever. Kind of lose track. But the government is being extremely vague and kind of hiding what's actually going on with the negotiations.
Government's hiding things? Who would have thunk?
Well...
Who would have thunk it?
Sorry, I had to make that comment. Go on.
But what we do know now is that the UK is definitely leaving the single market and definitely leaving the customs union. So what that basically means is that for...
Yes, thank you for those of us who aren't European. Please explain.
Yes. So the single market is a means in which countries within the European Union can trade freely with one another. It's like a free trade agreement, which it limits things like taxation when you're actually shipping goods. So, for example, if we trade baguettes with France, for example, sorry to be a stereotype, but
it's okay to stereotype the French. Don't worry.
Because we're in the European Union, the taxation is much less because it's pooled across the countries. Now, if you're outside this single market, then you have to take all of that taxation hit yourself. The French don't actually have to do any of it. So when we're trading, if the French are trading with us, we're taking a massive monetary hit. If we're trading with the French are taking a massive hit, which de-incentivizes trade in that sense. So it stagnates ultimately economic growth. So we're leaving the single market. The customs union is a means by which, again, countries within the European Union can travel freely within the... I think it's called the Schengen area, or the
the Schengen zone. I think it's something like that.
Yeah,
some
so they
German
can travel freely. Yeah, so they can travel freely within the European Union. Once we're out of that, it makes things a lot more difficult. Visas have got a lot harder to get. So if you want to work, for instance, as I was saying earlier, if you want to work or study in a European country, it's going to be a lot more difficult. You do not get the privileges. So, for example, in my wallet at the moment, I've got something called a European health insurance card, which means because I'm a citizen of a European Union country, if I fall ill abroad, I'll be taken care of. The doctors in that country will take care of me free of charge. Now, as soon as we leave the European Union, that privilege.
Wait, I have a question. You said the doctors will take care of you free of charge, even in countries where they don't have basic or not universal, just not free healthcare, but this like the NHS style healthcare like you guys have.
Yeah, because the whole point of the European health insurance card is that even if you're in a country where you don't have universal healthcare or if there's a private system, because of the European Union's structure, the taxation we pay to the European Union kind of covers it. So being in the European Union...
So it's basically being subsidized by the UK currently.
Effectively, and other countries. So, I mean, it means if you're from a slightly poorer European Union country, for example, like, I don't know, maybe Greece at the moment.
Poland, or...
Romania.
Yeah, and the like, and that can be a real benefit. I mean, it's obviously a benefit even if you're from the UK, for instance, because you still don't have to pay or anything. So you lose that privilege. Visas, as I said, are going to be a lot harder to get by, and just general travel is a lot more difficult. So there's that. So we'll be leaving that as well.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you stayed in the single market, would Britain still have to abide by the European Union, like trade, all the rules and regulations and European laws and such?
Like trade agreements would be the same, but the laws wouldn't be binding. They would be so the UK.
So the rules, and all the avocado laws and guacamole laws wouldn't be as much, because I forget how many laws there are on an avocado, but there's way too many laws on avocados.
And banana shapes as well.
Yeah, and banana shapes. I forgot about that.
So if you're in the single market, you have to abide by those rules, like the trading rules. But other rules, like for example, European law is non-binding. So, like you have to follow the trading rules, but you don't have to follow the actual European law.
How about the migrant situation? Would Britain still be required to take in migrants if they were in the single market?
No, because that's a separate thing.
Okay.
It's not part of the trading negotiations, so it's kind of like that's based on European law, which is voted on in Parliament. If UK doesn't have a seat, they can't reasonably expect the UK to abide by the law. It's like kind of the European Union taking a vote and expecting America to make a law based on that.
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, the European Union seems like a gigantic behemoth of bureaucracy, red tape, and very scary, shady government things that places a lot of centralized power in the hands of the Germans. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I hate the Germans for various reasons that I'll get into later. That's sort of why I, as an outsider, was rooting for the UK to have a Brexit, and preferably a hard Brexit, because I think that the European Union is dangerous, because it centralizes power in such a way that it really doesn't do it with any democratic legitimacy, because the European Union was formed as a mere economic union, and then it sort of morphed slowly into the political bureaucratic behemoth it's become. And the people who voted into the European Union back in the day were promised that this wouldn't happen, that it wouldn't become a political union. And the fact that it did, and essentially the voters were lied to in order to get Britain into this whole mess, that really tells me that this is a dangerous thing that you are a part of. You know?
Well, I mean, let's be clear what the European Union actually is. It is now a political union, I'll give you that. However, I think the whole thing of saying centralized power and how that's a bad thing is more ideological. So people on the centre ground or the left are going to be sort of not necessarily pro more government interference or more centralized power, but they're not going to be as opposed to it as slightly more libertarian or liberal standpoints may be on the economic side, certainly. Another thing is that the nature of the European Union, they've been so careful in making sure it is democratic. We have European elections every 4 years. Every country has a certain number of MEPs that it sends to the EU, to Parliament. And laws are made based on the interests of the continent. Now, you can argue that there's a lot of bureaucracy, and I'm sure there is. That the EU isn't a perfect thing. But to say that leaving it would be a benefit to the UK is absurd. So you can certainly argue, okay, it's got too much power. It's effectively a massive European centralized government that's giving the Germans lots of power, whatever. But if you then leave that, then it's suicide, isn't it?
Out of curiosity,
leaving the customs union, I'm not going to be able to study abroad with any ease. I'm not going to be able to travel in Europe with any ease at all. My health isn't covered. The economy is going to stagnate as a consequence of the higher kind of trade tariff agreements and the high taxation as a consequence of leaving the single market. I mean, no one is benefiting from this at all, least of all the UK.
No, obviously, I believe in government devolution. I kind of looking back at history, I think it should operate more like the European Steel and Coal Committee Union. I forget what it was called.
The EEC.
Where you have common markets, fairly open borders, free trade, but yet you didn't have the European Parliament, just because like people like Hungary and Poland, there is serious resistance growing to the EU just because of the European Parliament trying to flex its muscle. And I think that if you devolve back to that stage where nations still feel like they have that amount of sovereignty, it's kind of, I mean, how many members in the European Parliament does like Hungary have, for example? They'll have like, I don't know, a very small portion of it. You can't expect them to bow down to every European Parliament order.
Okay, well, let's take the European Parliament out of it for a second, and then what do you have? Then you have a completely undemocratic bureaucracy, where the only nations that actually have any interest are the ones with the major powers. So that would be, what, Germany, France, the UK, maybe Italy?
I think you should just have the common market and the fairly open borders, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, but how do you control that without any sort of representation? The countries still need to have... It's no good just saying... okay, let's say Hungary have an election, and they whatever government gets in on whatever popular vote. Okay, so for example, the Conservatives got their majority in 2015 with 36% of the vote. So, okay, let's make it the UK. The UK then goes to the European Parliament with the Conservatives effectively being the equivalent of all the MEPs. They're then negotiating on the behalf of the entire UK for these trade agreements, for the free trade, the open borders. What's much better, I think, is to have the European elections where, okay, this is a separate matter. The voters can then go to the ballot thinking, okay, this is who I'm wanting to send to Europe. This is who I want to represent me in Europe. And that's the whole idea of the European Parliament system. It's not just giving a free hand to the government of the day in your country to go away and try and negotiate with the EU, because as we've seen with Brexit so far, that's just not really gone very well.
What I'm saying is the size of the major countries are definitely putting pressure on smaller governments, Poland, Hungary, that have led to more nationalist groups, which, if you saw the last video Steve and I did, we have serious problems with nationalist parties. These nationalist parties aren't just like, let's get rid of the EU. They're bringing seriously tribalistic collectivism into the forefront. And I'll say that
well,
I just think that's a lot of that nationalism.
I'm more for civic nationalism, not ethnic nationalism. You know? And I think because you have a lot of movements popping up around Europe that are either like tacitly or even openly ethnically nationalist, and that's pretty scary because it's essentially a equal and opposite reaction to the things that the EU is doing, and like. I think the serious red flag that should have been put up with regards to the EU is when they announced plans for an EU army. Like that's really scary to me because it calls back it just sort of calls up examples throughout history where one sort of nation or movement or group tries to take control of a wide area with military force. I mean, if you have an army, you can't just have an army and not use it. You're gonna have to use it eventually. And like, what's the justification for that? To protect against Russia? That's doesn't really seem to me like that's a good justification.
Well, I think the issue here is I think a lot of the time media blows completely out of proportion the actual power the EU has. I mean, the legislative power that the EU actually has in comparison to central governments of nations is actually very small.
Well, they're forcing
the EU army idea.
Are they not forcing countries to take in a certain amount of refugees per country?
Well, that's all negotiated by the nations themselves with the EU, so that's not actually the EU forcing them themselves.
But when countries like Germany and France have I don't know if they have a majority, but Germany, France, and Italy, who are very pro-migration, then they're forcing other countries, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Greece. I mean,
okay, but let's say you don't have the EU then. If you say you don't have the EU, hello. If you then don't have the EU, then what you're effectively saying is, okay, let's go away and negotiate as individual nations how many migrants we want to take in. If there's no European central body there to actually monitor the negotiations, or at least sort of, I don't know, at least give a number and give a figure to each nation, then the migrant situation would be a hell of a lot worse. Each nation will be doing it based on their ideology.
I'm
I
not
just don't
saying
think that's.
I'm not saying I completely disagree with you, but there's been I'm just saying that its effects in like those nations, Poland, the nationalist movements there. Though I will admit, when Feedback sent me a video, it was by someone called Sean. I was just referring back to the migrant movement, where most of the immigrants in England are Polish people. Yeah, I've never seen an EDL or like Tommy Robinson or what's that one woman's name in England ever talk about Polish immigrants and their dangers.
Probably because the Polish immigrants are well behaved. That's just a guess. I'm not,
Let's integrate everyone.
Well, in that regard, then, don't you see that the kind of... Sorry, go on.
Just a side point. I think you should always be aware when someone is very anti-immigration that there is always an underbelly of talking, of whistleblowing for more racial profiling.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, both Local and I are very anti-racial identitarianism and anti-racial collectivism. We talked about that in the last podcast. So.
But yeah, I'm pretty open. I'm pretty good with the migration into Europe. I'm pretty favorable with that. But I'm just saying that there has definitely been a heavy-handed method when it comes to the EU centralization that I'm not sure I can endorse.
Well, also the EU has intervened in the democratic process of EU member nations, and I don't think that's a good idea because there was a case in Romania a few years back where they were going to impeach their president for corruption on corruption charges, right?
Well,
and
I don't know how you can impeach a president on corruption without corruption charges, but go on.
Well, yeah. And there was going to be a vote because the way they do it in Romania is the people vote to impeach the president. So there was an election held, and
imagine if we did that.
And if so the president, who didn't want to be impeached, obviously, was telling people to stay home if they support him, right? And and what happened was, the people that went to the polls and voted to impeach the president, but the voter
participation rate.
Yeah, the participation rate was under 50%. So legally, there's nothing wrong with that, as per Romanian law. Like, you can impeach a president if two people go and vote.
Steve.
You know? What? Hello?
You cut out for a little bit.
Oh, in Romanian law, there's nothing wrong with that, because even if, one person goes out and votes against the president, then he's going to be impeached, because the other, all the other people in the country just decided not to vote, you know? So that's... But what happened was, Merkel and the EU got concerned about the situation, and decided to implement/enforce an EU law that said if you're going to impeach the president, you have to have more than 50% voter participation. And so what happened was the president didn't get impeached even though the people of Romania voted to impeach him, because the EU intervened. And I think that's a dangerous precedent to set.
Well, we go back to the thing. The president said that if you support him, don't go out, don't vote.
That way,
yes?
That way they wouldn't. They could fall into the EU trap.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, exactly. So that's the entire premise of the election. Okay. Now the EU then goes and says, okay, we need a 50% turnout or whatever to actually legitimize this impeachment. Of course, there's a question of sovereignty there. However, I don't know. It's like it's quite a tricky situation, because on the one hand, you could easily argue that it's not a majority of votes, but
well, if people don't vote, and they choose not to vote.
Well, I would say that if you live in a nation and you're eligible to vote, and you are aware that there's an election coming up, which all citizens really should be, and it's your fault if you aren't, if you decide not to go to the polls and vote, what you're saying is, I don't have an opinion, and you can't count me as part of this process. Or, something along those lines. So, really, if you're having an election and only one person shows up, at the polls, then theoretically the election should still be good because all the other people decided not to show up, you know? So it was their own free choice involved in the matter.
But yeah, no, I'm definitely concerned with some of what the anti-EU movement is going towards. I will say that. I'm just looking at it from a centralization point.
Mhm.
And I disagree with just centralization in general. So that's just my premise of that. But there, like Dave said earlier, there's definitely a lot of whistleblowing towards identitarianism and ethno-nationalism.
Well, I think so much of this argument against the EU is purely ideological. It's about anti-centralization. It's about anti-nationalization of whatever it may be. It's purely, and it's generally on Eurosceptic movements are generally on the sort of right to far right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's an easy way to say, okay, let's blame the EU. Let's get our sovereignty back this way. But what is always overestimated is the actual amount of power that the EU has. Nationalized central governments will always have more power than the EU. In that regard, the anger of nationalistic placements, of nationalistic movements, I should say, is completely misplaced. It's a very easy way out to say, let's blame the EU, let's blame the Muslims, whatever. What's a lot harder to do is actually legitimize your arguments by saying, okay, let's actually look at what our central government is doing, which is where people should be looking. Looking at the EU and saying, okay, they've done this wrong, they've done this wrong, they've done this wrong, and then turning a blind eye to the actual benefits of, say, the single market, the customs union, how we can freely trade, how we can actually elect members of the European Parliament to represent us, completely gets rid of the entire nationalistic argument against the EU. Well, people should always be looking at their own government, because that is where the real power is. Blaming the EU. Look at the UK, for instance. We've left the EU. How's that going? You know, it's not going to go well. Well,
I think a lot of people are scared that they're going to leave the market. And I agree with you. There should be that common market. And I agree with you. The governments have more power than the EU, but there is definitely a trend of growing centralization when people are like he said that there's people are thinking about EU military. That scares me because that is just it's not a supranational force. It is an outside of national force or international arms.
Well, I do think that was completely blown out of proportion, to be honest. I don't think that was ever a reason.
And if it's something like the UN peacekeepers, I would have no problem with it. But even the EU army isn't the worst thing in the world because it was made to become independent of America for general reasons, just economically to the point where they no longer needed America's 100% help, which I agree with, because if you want to form a international group so that way you can become independent off America's tax dollars, I am 100% on board with you. But I'm losing my train of thought right now. But when you form this...
Can I tell you what frustrates me so much about Brexit? And so I will go back to your point. The thing that frustrates me so much about Brexit is not necessarily that we voted to leave the EU, however much I disagree with it, but the fact that now you have people in the House of Commons, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's a very hard line, very pro-Brexit MP.
I can't wait until he's your PM.
Is he the Brexit poster boy I've been hearing about?
He's
like a business guy or like a noble or something.
Oh, he speaks like he's from the 19th century, but anyway.
Yeah, I've read an article about him. I remember this.
Yeah, well, the problem comes when you've got people like him saying, okay, this is what the people voted for a hard Brexit. We're going to leave the single market. We're going to leave the customs union. It's got to be a hard Brexit. It's got to be hard to be good, blah, blah, blah. A lot of what we've been saying is, okay, the reason people are anti-EU isn't because of the trade agreements, isn't because of the customs union or the single market. It's a thing of sovereignty, right? Mm-hmm. It's a thing of trying to tame nationalistic movements, in a sense, right? So when they're saying, okay, now we've got to leave the single market, we've got to leave...
Left side?
That's not what the will of the people is about. The will of the people, and I strongly disagree with the fact that you can call it the will of the people, because 52% of a turnout of about 70% is not the will of the people, but that's besides the point. But if you're talking about the will of the people is not to say, okay, you've given us this mandate to leave the EU. Now we're going to take that mandate, twist it somewhat, and use it for our own political and ideological gain. I think that's completely not only irresponsible, but quite frankly selfish to the party, because it is for party political reasons, and it's just ridiculous.
I do agree with you that the hard Brexit is dangerous. These common markets have created stability in a continent that has always been rife with conflict. I mean, there's only been I can count the wars that have happened in Europe. What, the Yugoslavian wars? Since the creation of the EU.
Of course, you would talk about the Yugoslavian wars.
But I can't really think of any other war than the Yugoslavian war in Europe, other than unless you really count the Irish.
There were two fairly big conflicts, you know.
Since the creation of the EU is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. No, the civil war in Ukraine.
Civil war in Ukraine, but civil wars don't necessarily count for talking about international politics. But Russia's meddling, yes. And then if you want to count the IRA-UK conflict as a war, sure. It's created this stability in Europe that hadn't really been achieved, that honestly Gladstone would be proud of, in my opinion.
I'm honestly gonna have to disagree with both of you on a couple of points, because I just want to go back to this.
Feelings.
Sorry, what?
Hurt my feelings, why don't you?
Yeah, no, you suck and your opinions are awful. So I just want to go back to this point about the EU army, because that's sort of a sign that national sovereignty is being eroded. And if you look back at history, what this sort of reminds me of is ancient Greek history, where you have the lead up to
League.
Sorry, what?
Not the Peloponnesian, the Delian League.
Yes, the Delian League. It was the lead up to the Peloponnesian Wars, and what you had is Athens and Sparta were kind of in like a Cold War, sort of thing where they were trying to get more city-states allied with them, and they were just gearing up for war, right?
Honestly, hold on, can I interject? That's the most interesting comparison I've heard with the Peloponnesian War, the Cold War, because they just beat back their common enemy, the Persians, and they both gained this hegemony over the Greek area.
Yeah.
Honestly, I never really thought of it that way. Interesting point.
I mean, history's a cycle, man. You just over and over again.
But go on.
But like when you think about when Athens sort of is approaching these city-states, there is a point where, and most of them were like democratic-ish, like Athens, where there was this independent city-state, which was an island in the middle of the Aegean, and they were they just sort of wanted to be, neutral, kind of Switzerland about it.
Oh,
and they were approached by both Athens and Sparta, and they said, "Listen, if you don't join us, we're going to take you by force, right? So you have to join one of us, or else we're gonna, get our fleet, which is right over there. We can be here in like 2 days, and we're gonna take you over."
Hold on, I have this reading actually on my iPad. It's written by Thucydides. That's referring to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
the island. I think it was the Melian.
I do apologise. I must butt in here. For one thing, I think we should stop talking about Brexit for a bit at some point. It's all I've been talking about with people for like the last year.
Well, I'm just about to like finish my my thing, and then we can go on to the next topic.
The whole Greek comparison is a particularly robust one, because it's not, the EU isn't saying to EU member states saying, okay, if you're not willing to cooperate with this EU army, we're going to take you by force. I just think that's very misleading.
Well, no, but here's my point, right? Sparta is sort of analogous to the Russians in this scenario. And the EU wants a centralization of military force, and Germany is like Athens. Because what is essentially happening is Athens says to all these city-states, listen, we have to group together and we have to get a common army, and you have to dissolve your national armies and then just contribute your forces to the Athenian army, because then we can protect ourselves from the Spartans and the Persians.
I think you're going slippery slope here, by the way.
Why? I mean, no, I don't think so, because because I'm just analyzing patterns in history that are similar to our situation now. And I'm not saying that the EU is definitely going to devolve into a totalitarian whatever, but I'm just saying that the climate of the time right now reminds me of things that involve tyranny, and I would really like to avoid tyranny at any cost.
Couldn't
I've
this
always
apply
said-
to NATO? Couldn't this apply to the UN as well?
Well,
Well,
not
yeah,
really,
it's the thing.
because
Well, I do
because
agree. Actually, I agree with
the
that.
United States never said that the NATO members have to dissolve their armies and then have the United States protect them solely. Like, NATO
Who's
members are still allowed to
saying
have
we-
their own armies.
Also,
this is new to me. Who's saying we have to dissolve our armies?
Well, it's not necessarily dissolve your
It's
armies, but
very
make a communal EU army. Because
But that never really.
that's
I've
sort
never-
of the
I-
first step to...
Well, then I
Centralization.
could. Well, what would your refute be that that's the long-term goal of the UN? We're going to get a world army.
But the UN's army, I will defend him. I don't think that the EU would form a single army, but the UN's
Well, that's
army,
just feels though, isn't it? I mean, I feel like the EU won't form an army.
the UN army though is a peacekeeping mission of severe restrictions on when it can be used and how it's used. In his defense,
When it comes down to the EU, because it is an economic union, which I agree initially it was a trade union to an economic union to more of a political union. I do believe it's evolved. And when that natural progression happens, there needs to be some level of authority and level of force involved to keep this structure intact. And when there's issues such as Russia rubbing borders with the EU and the Baltics, there needs to be some kind of overwhelming security force within the EU to maintain the integrity of the Union. And without that army, it doesn't have that authority or force against some superpowers such as Russia. So for the EU to
isn't
kind of
pretty
maintain...
much- hold on. Isn't pretty much every EU member in NATO though?
Pretty much, yeah.
So isn't NATO sufficient to protect the EU members or the NATO members who are in the EU from Russia?
Because
Well,
NATO
I'm just
already
pla-
has that infrastructure to protect them from Russia.
Like,
You
I
get-
don't see the need to create an EU communal army, especially when the chance is there for the bureaucrats at the top to mismanage that army for their own gains.
You say the same for NATO.
Yeah, couldn't you say the same
Easily.
for the United States
But
and the States?
NATO isn't a communal army.
It's a voluntary alliance that
Yeah.
you can disregard at any point, like France did when we called Article 3 in Afghanistan.
Well, then
Okay, let's say
the
then
UK
that
is leaving the EU, so couldn't that apply as well?
Yeah, but if the EU had a communal army, then maybe it would be a lot harder for countries to leave the EU because their armies would be integrated. And if a country decided that they wanted to leave the EU, well, if you're at the top of the EU sort of structure, then that's not going to bode well for you because that would just weaken your country.
I
weaken
feel you're
your
making
union.
a little like you're making quite a lot of assumptions there. For one, the EU army thing was never something that was reasonably going to get off the ground. I mean, it was completely blown out of proportion, as I said, by media. But then to say that if a country wanted to leave the EU, it would make it more complicated. They would stop it. I think that is purely based on emotion rather than reason. I just don't think there's any rational way that you could argue that.
I'm just saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and there hasn't ever been a tyranny on Earth that, before it happened, said, "Okay, listen, we're doing these, we're doing these things because we want to become a tyranny and we want to become an oppressive power structure." No, they always justified it with, "Well, we need to keep the peace, we need to protect from these foreign enemies, we need to do this, that, and the other thing." And before you knew,
or enemies inside of the country. Talk
Right.
with things like the.
How do you feel
Nazis.
about Trump's tax bill?
I have problems with it, but it was.
So do I.
I have problems with any
Well,
tax
the
code,
reason I bring it up is because of the increased funding to the armed forces. Doesn't that give you that same kind of feeling of this?
Oh, I have a huge problem. with
Yes, yeah.
militarism in America. I do agree with that.
But there still are many precautions in place in the American system to prevent the elected powers from using the army against the citizens and for their own needs and things.
Yeah,
You know
and so
how
does
Trump
the
wants to have this
EU.
parade?
But yeah, I would definitely want the United States to have less military spending and capacity.
You know how Trump wants to have this military parade?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so dumb.
Jesus.
I can't.
Hold on, I've been saying that he should have a parade where every service member in a foreign country marches home, but that's just me.
Doesn't he want to do it to like stick up France because he saw one in France? He's like,
Yeah, it's
oh,
like
we
the
need to
Steel
be-
Day.
we need to
They
be
have
better
one,
than
why can't
France.
we have one?
Right.
Socialist.
I think he's been watching too much North Korean state TV.
I think the mainstream media has been watching too much North Korean propaganda, but that's just
Loves his
They've been
Fox and
treating-
Friends.
they've been treating this sister like she's a goddess.
Feedback. Do you live in America or do you live in?
I
No,
live
he's-
in the UK.
Oh,
Yeah, we finally got another Euro trash. What?
That's
What
I
happened?
We're
Yeah,
finally
what?
getting more Euro trash. What?
Oh, okay.
Well, we're both from the UK, so you need some French
Well-
people or something.
you mean the Soviet Union?
Jesus.
Damn.
You're implying that French people are people, though.
Yeah, French
That's
and people
true.
can't be used in the same sentence.
Unless it's not people.
You see, the one thing we Americans inherit from the Brits is our hatred of the French. We just have a hatred of the French permeating American culture for some weird reason.
Yeah. You know how they have Swiss Army knives?
All right.
Yeah, the people that freed us, we just hate them.
You know the Swiss Army knives?
Yeah.
French Army knives are just white flags popping out of them.
Damn.
I'm actually holding a Swiss Army knife right now. I'm flipping it open and closed.
Dude, I need to find my tomahawk.
Cut my
I
fingers
got a
so
tomahawk a couple months ago and I lost it.
Anyway, should we pivot to another conversation topic?
Yeah. So you
So,
guys, do you guys listen to Jordan Peterson very often?
Yes, I do.
some of the highlights, pretty much.
I watched this video today called "The Meaning of Life for Men," and
haven't
this
seen
is the second time I've watched it. I'll put it in Discord here, but it was a very interesting video, and he went over how men now are not really taking on a lot of responsibility, and they don't see a reason to take responsibility, and it's hurting the male culture, and it is driving them crazy with boredom and things like that. Here, I'll put it in here.
So what do you think about it?
I'm going to say that it's not just a male problem, it is a societal problem that has come from the socialization of our losses.
The socialization of what?
Our losses, like the welfare state. Because, once the welfare state really kicked off, we see issues like single parenthood and broken families just skyrocket in America. Because instead of having close relationships that are necessary with your husband and wife, they are now just relationships that can be replaced by the state.
Well, I don't think it's quite to that point yet, but I do agree with you that some welfare systems can unintentionally incentivize
Well, look at the rates I was
the
talking about
separation
since
of
the Great
families.
Society.
Sorry, what?
Look at the rates I was talking about since the Great Society, Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society.
Yeah. Poverty was basically dropping at a steady rate of 1% per year or something.
Just like
until-
everything, the U.S. government has declared war on terrorism, drugs, Vietnamese farmers. The war on poverty has just created more poverty.
Nazis. Oh, wait a minute. That's not one of the things.
The Soviet
Define
Union
war
won
on
that war.
poverty. What do you mean war on poverty?
Have you never
Oh,
heard that before?
Well, no, I'm just interested to see what you take it to mean.
Well,
Yeah,
Lyndon
I'm
B.
not familiar
Johnson
with this
declared.
either,
Was
that's
it Johnson?
interesting.
He declared a war on poverty.
Yeah.
It was
I believe it
Johnson.
was Johnson. When he created something he liked to call the Great Society, which was his enlargement of our American welfare state, he applied it to the civil rights movement, but that was actually a Republican spearheaded issue. And what else? Just basically enlargement of the welfare state.
Yeah,
and
he
liberalization of
basic-
economics.
He basically declared a war on poverty, and he wanted to basically eliminate most poverty by, X and X year or whatever. But what actually happened was once his legislation took effect, the poverty rate actually increased. And there are various theories for why that happened.
Over time, too.
So how did this cause problems?
Well, our poverty... Well, I mean...
Because we're spending more, and the objective is to decrease poverty levels. And the objective has been failed. Objectively, in my opinion.
Can you use the objective
Objectively, in my opinion.
Objectively, in your opinion. What an
Hey,
absurd thing to say.
subjectively.
Well, nothing is objective, in my opinion, but
That's true. Yeah, basically, nothing's objective.
What are you, a postmodernist?
I agree with Plato there, actually. I think he's a pre-modernist, but...
I'm gonna have to disagree with you. I think some things are objective.
Like what?
There are certain types, well, obviously science.
Well, but isn't science research by scientists who are human and therefore less than perfect?
Yeah, but as far as we are concerned, if you're performing the scientific method, which is essentially trial and error, hypothesizing and testing your hypotheses until you have tested them rigorously enough to be considered fact, then that's the closest we can get to objectivity.
Isn't the scientific method backed up by human observation, though?
Yeah, but what else do we have besides human observation?
I'm just saying but you can't say it's objective because we have nothing more objective.
Would you say it's subjective that gravity falls down? Or not, that's a stupid way of putting it. Would you say it's subjective that gravity makes things fall down?
Well, I agree with the premise that you have, but yes, again, we are less than the human. It might be a different force other than gravity that we just can't see or feel. It could
I
be...
fear that we're slowly delving into the realms of philosophy.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
To get back on track.
What's wrong with philosophy?
Well, it's fine, but this is a political podcast.
Yeah.
I had a
I'm
little
not
binge.
that well versed in philosophy.
Just
As long as we're not delving into retardation, it's fine.
Just to cycle back to Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
So my perspective on him and know what he was all about was from little clips that I'd seen either appearing on Twitter or on Facebook, and he, from the information I gathered, the little information I had, he came across as he was like the almost hard right, conservative right kind of poster boy.
Actually,
Well, he's...
hold on. Can I disagree because I have some evidence?
Well, let me just say, because I haven't actually finished my point. Because
Sorry.
yeah, that was the impression I got, and then I kind of dived into his content and I binged on it. I did a live stream on it when I did like a politics day, and we watched like about a dozen of his videos, and I guess my conclusion is that he's always kind of pandering to this. In the past, things were a lot better. And the problem is, I don't believe that. I think right now we're as most technologically and socially advanced than we've ever been in all human history. So when I watch Jordan Peterson, I struggle to kind of clutch onto his content because I don't acknowledge there's a problem. So if I don't acknowledge there's a problem, I don't feel this need to want kind of a door for the past, because that's a lot of his content comes down to. It starts his little lectures with, one, there's a problem. This was what caused this problem, and this is what we need to do to fix the ills of society. But obviously, I don't even start off with acknowledging there is a problem with what we've got. So therefore, I really struggled to even watch a lot of his content or latch onto it.
Well, I don't think he ever says, we need to do this, and this is the problem we have in society because it's not the past, or because we need to go back to the past. Like, he gives specific reasoning and examples for things that he thinks are wrong with society. And, like, I think there are things you need to take on an individual level instead of generalizing to, well, he wants to go back to the past.
That's kind of the impression that I got, because what the biggest issue I've found with Peterson, just sorry to take another jump back, is that he has like a lecture that's an hour and he talks a lot. He's very good at speaking. He's like a literally walking thesaurus. He'll say lots and lots of words. And then sometimes after you've watched for like 5 minutes, you kind of zone out and you're like, what did he actually say then? You know, because almost like he's saying lots of words and not a lot of information is being perceived. And that's really great, particularly if you're like, oh, I don't know, you kind of want to be convinced that he's kind of a smart guy, because you need to like, because I don't know, sometimes it really does help if you've got a great vocabulary, because you hear it and you're like, wow, these words are really amazing. Anyway, sorry, to jump back to my point. He kind of says quite a lot, and the notion I get, like, from piecing things together after like watching so much, because there's no little information there, is that he's a religious guy, and he has these kind of, I'm going to say, conservative religious views, and it always seems to me that that's always where it seems to latch back to. He's like, he wants traditional roles for men and women, and yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think I don't think his justification is like just religion or just biblical, because I think when he brings up religious traditions, he's saying that these practices have existed in sort of these archetypal texts for so long that must point to something bigger, sort of, because I watched his lecture series on the psychological significance of the Bible, and you're right when you say that he talks a lot and he doesn't get a lot of stuff covered in a short amount of time, because he didn't actually start reading the Bible until like the third lecture, and they're each over an hour long. But he does actually say a lot of things when he's talking. It's just that he has a lot to say, I think. But when I was watching that series, I got the impression that he was sort of arguing more for an essentialist view of human nature. Not necessarily we should do this because it's in the Bible, but we should do this because it's in the Bible, and it's in the Bible for a reason, because people have thought that this is the right thing to do, and it turned out that this was the right thing to do for thousands of years. And if it's important, well, they're going to place it in their archetypal text.
Well, actually, I'm going to go back to discuss Feedback's points. Sorry, I can speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about his whole transgender issue, right? I don't think he's necessarily so much a authoritarian conservative, because he said, I don't want to just be forced to use certain pronouns. He said, I will voluntarily use people's pronouns on written reports, as long as they're not forcing me to do so. And additionally, I was listening to an interview with Eric Weinstein, a progressive evolutionary biologist, who said, Jordan Peterson is great because he understands sociology and evolutionary biology. So when he makes points like the lobster point, he's very well informed.
Sorry, what? Can you say that again?
Yeah, your mouth's getting moved away from the mic.
You said something about the lobsters, and that's where you cut out.
Even evolutionary biologists think he's very smart, even if they're progressive.
Yeah, so you were trying to say that he sort of blends evolutionary biology and sociology. Yeah.
So when he says things, he's actually not just spouting random things. He's speaking he's actually saying substantive stuff. But I gotta go, actually, guys, to see.
Oh yeah.
Bye.
Is Steve recording this, or is...
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
But can I just make the point that in the description of that Jordan Peterson video you sent, it's just quite funny. Jordan Peterson dropping some serious hydrogen truth bombs at the end of a lecture when a student asked him a question. I mean, I love descriptions like that. It's always like, cringy feminist gets owned, and
yeah. I mean, I didn't read the description, but it wasn't from his channel.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder what the political views are of the person that uploaded this are.
Yeah, I don't know that Jordan Peterson is a particularly ideological person. I don't know that
Can I read some of the comments from this video to kind of illustrate my point a little bit? So the first comment goes, "Responsibility, man. That's where the meaning of life is." The next comment goes,
if you watch the video, you'll understand. That's the last thing he says in the whole video.
Yeah, I mean the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that there's always it always comes up whatever. Well, the ones that I've watched, maybe I've cherry picked the ones that brought out this mindset, but it looked to me that every video that I watched kind of tried to illustrate, we need to, there was something in the past that was really great, and it's a shame that we've lost our way now. That's always kind of the point I come away from. He goes, another comment here goes, "Man here, lost, but using you to find my way back. Thank you."
I'm just curious, why do you think it's a bad thing that he appeals to things in the past?
because objectively we're in a better state now.
Yeah, you
Well,
have kind of.
What sort of things have led us to be in this better state?
For one, technological progress.
I would argue
economy
that the fall of the Soviet
growth.
Union was a very big thing.
Well,
But I could
suppose so, but
end of the Cold
That's-
War.
Well, I can't really pinpoint a certain point. I can't like say, oh, it was the Renaissance, you know, like when Michelangelo did that sculpture. That was the point where things had to get a lot better. No, yeah, there is a technological element as well, but if you see, there's sort of trends. Like overall, there's a trending up of IQ. There's a trending up. There's less people in poverty. There's trending up technological advancement. Well, I agree with that. No, I agree. But but then to acknowledge that, you've got to acknowledge that today we're kind of at the highest point we've been in every single way. You know, sure.
So
We definitely are in a better situation now than we ever have been, but I think the more the concern is where we're going.
So, I think a
Which is
better
always
way
what
to
it's like
argue
in history.
against to sort of argue against Peterson, for lack of a better phrase, it would be to say, like, for example, he makes this video on why personal responsibility is a really good virtue, and that if everyone had this sense of personal responsibility, society would be a lot better. And then the proper criticism of that, and I don't want to straw man you or anything, but I'm just using this as an example, would be to say, well, personal responsibility is something that actually contributes negatively to society, and since people have become less responsible, society has gone has become better because of these reasons. But what you're saying is, well, he appeals to things that people held in the past, and since the future is better than the past, then he must be wrong. And I don't think that follows.
I think his argument is more based on nostalgia, though. It's not like he's trying to argue away the fact that we have come this far. He's trying to argue away by cherry picking certain elements that he can easily argue for. He's looking at things in the past and saying, "Oh yes, wasn't that fantastic?" and appealing to people that actually think, "Oh yeah, that was good."
You know, y'all keep talking about how he always appeals to the past, but I really don't get that from him when I watch those videos.
Well, that's the biggest problem. What I found, because you find that if I was to like write a synopsis of a Jordan Peterson video, it would be 20 minutes long and it would be a paragraph, because I feel like he injects so much fluff words into his seminars that it's very difficult to come away with it. Because after watching a lot of his videos, I can't actually... In my head, I was thinking while you guys were talking, I was thinking, can I think of an exact moment where he actually said what the ills of society were, what the actual problem was, why he was around to actually fix problems? And I can't actually think in my head what it was.
He kind of waffles in a sense like Russell Brand does. Russell Brand uses a lot of big words to not get much done. Yeah, I know.
I relate because I used to love Russell Brand, and now I watch him and I'm like, do you understand that? Like 90% of the audience don't even understand what you're even saying.
Yeah, it's these big words, and then he tries to like make an argument out of them, but never really does.
Yeah, there's a lot
ends
of
up in a very similar way. Yeah.
I don't really relate to what you're saying though, because whenever I watch some Peterson content, and maybe I'm just watching the right ones, I don't know. I feel like I am getting something out of it, and I feel like he is actually saying substantive things. And I don't know. I guess it's a difference in experience.
Can you recall one?
Well, let me think. Right, so there was one video where he was talking about the Nazis, and he said that from a psychological point of view, the Nazis and sort of the far right are very industrious and I guess conscientious, maybe, would be the psychology term. And what that means is they're very sensitive to disgust. And he says, and he sort of makes the argument that the Germans and the Nazis didn't hate the Jews, they were disgusted by the Jews. And that sort of was an interesting thing to me. Like, he was using psychology to analyze history, and that's sort of a substantive thing.
Yo, there's like an echo in your microphone, Steve.
That
No,
wasn't
it's not.
happening earlier in the
There's
session.
not.
It's free. Is open mics a little too sensitive?
Who?
All right.
Free
Yeah,
feed.
I'll mute myself when I'm not talking.
Do you know that when you say that, I won't mind you linking that afterwards now I think about it, but I feel like I'm sorry to conversation drift, but it kind of worries me when you say that, because that makes me think, God, I can kind of see why now some kind of... Yet again, I understand guilt by association, I understand it's flawed logic, I get that, but I can kind of understand how there's some kind of very far right-leaning individuals who do latch on to Jordan Peterson as their poster boy, because that could be interpreted as whistleblowing, like trying to give excuses for the Nazis and thinking, oh, well, this is a logical explanation of why they gassed the Jews.
Yeah.
Maybe my explanation isn't great, but in the video, if you actually watched it, you would not get that sense at all, because he's very critical of the Nazis and the communists, by the way, to a very high degree. He actually goes on and on at length about the atrocities committed in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany as a way of talking about why totalitarian ideologies are sort of bad from a psychological point of view. And there's this one video he did where he described the conditions in a Soviet gulag and in a Nazi concentration camp. And he sort of made the point that you can't think that you are like, I don't know how else to put this, but if you lived in Nazi Germany, then you wouldn't be able to avoid getting sucked into the whole Nazi Party rhetoric, because he explained how during the war there were these like kind of police officers who were brought into Poland, and they were told, like, okay, this is wartime, you're gonna have to do some pretty crazy stuff, some pretty gruesome stuff, but you don't have to, like, you can go back home. And what essentially happened was no one went back home, because then they would be abandoning their comrades and this and that, but eventually these sort of normal people ended up doing things like putting children in concentration camps. And his point was that humans aren't really immune to the sort of collectivist demagoguery that's going on sometimes in totalitarian regimes. And yeah, so he's very critical of the Nazis and all that.
There's
I think it's... No, go on.
No, go ahead.
I think it's interesting, though, that he should make the jump from kind of Soviet and Nazi autocracy to then use that as an argument as complete personal freedom. I mean, if you look at governments of today, while you do have, large elements of centralization and, things like that, there is still government autonomy. There is a lot of personal liberty still. And I think that the way, if he's using the argument of the gulags and concentration camps as an argument against government autocracy, I think that's highly flawed given the modern context. Because I just don't think he can really reasonably use that as an argument for complete personal freedom.
Well, I don't think he's necessarily arguing for complete personal freedom. He's just sort of arguing against the patterns that he's seen in his readings of psychology and history, like collectivism, group rights, identitarianism, things like that. And he's made the point that he's... Sorry, go on.
I don't know. Well, in that regard, then I think it's sort of outdated. Then I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with, all of this anti-autocracy rhetoric is fine. I agree with the Nazis, and the Soviet communism was obviously a very bad thing. This level of autocracy was obviously not sustainable. It was not good for humanity. But to then disregard the democratic advancements and progress that we've made since then, and then to continue arguing against such things it's almost turning a blind eye to the progress that we've made. And that kind of goes back to the thing of him always appealing to this past thing, always appealing to the past, because he's not willing to look at actually what's going on. cherry picking moments from the past to use it as his argument.
Well, I don't really know if he is disregarding the democratic progress we've made in the past.
Well, that's the feel I haven't watched much of his stuff, but that's
Okay.
the feel I kind of get from it. So I mean, I may be misguided there.
He also says that he's a pretty non-ideological person, and the only reason that he is that he like works with sort of right-wing and conservative people is because those are the only people that'll actually talk to him and give him airtime. Like he was recently interviewed by Vice magazine, and they made like a hit piece on him, and so did Mike.com. And the right in his view, the right wing and conservatives seem to be the ones that are most accurately representing his beliefs, and that's why he talks to those people more than left wingers.
Well, then he might not be actively seeking to be an ideological person, but he must be coming across in that sense. Because if people on the left are unwilling to sort of give him a platform or speak to him, then there must be something he's saying that they disagree with. So in that regard, he is kind of promoting an element of ideology, whether he wants to or not. And that seems to be on the right.
Well, he's promoting more an element of anti-ideology because he's anti-collectivism and identitarianism, and he sees a lot of that stuff on the left right now. And he also is seeing it on the right, which is why he's made a lot of videos talking against the alt-right and things like that. But you know, it's just the people that are against the things that he's against represent his views the best. Like, to be against the far left, you don't have to be right wing. You just have to be not in the far left.
No, I mean, I do get what you mean. It just seems like, I don't know, he seems to be more of an anti-left commentator rather than a pro-right commentator, certainly. I mean,
Yeah.
I see that he's obviously against elements of the right, but I think that comes back to him just being anti-autocracy, really, rather than being anti any particular ideological framework that works within the right.
Did you see the Channel 4 interview that he had?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I did.
Yep.
Can I have
What
a brief
do
overview?
you think of that? Because you know, I don't know.
That
much
he
about Kathy
played that
Newman.
perfectly.
I
She,
couldn't stand
He was
that
just
lady.
trying to. Newman was
That
just trying
woman.
to comment him through
Oh
the
my
entire thing and
God.
attack his fake beliefs.
You, Kathy Newman. Whew, she's so annoying.
She seemed very unprepared for that interview. It's almost like she was trying to get lots of gotcha moments.
Yeah, she was.
To get like a nice little soundbite.
So what you're saying is,
It felt like she was really not. She wasn't equipped for that interview.
So feedback. What you're saying is that women are incapable of being prepared to interview a man.
No.
The problem I have with the "so what you're saying is" thing is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to oversimplify his views so that they can attack like his beliefs that he doesn't hold.
Yeah, yeah.
What's essentially happening is a tactic that the media uses a lot. Is that once you explain your views, they'll go back and then they'll say, "So what you're saying is," and then they'll use a few of the words that you use to summarize your argument in a way that misrepresents your argument. And then you might be tricked into arguing for things that you don't actually believe in because of their misrepresentation. And Peterson did not fall for that trap at all because one of his strong suits is that he's a very well-spoken person, I think. And he means what he says in most cases.
Yeah, I agree with that.
yeah. In fact, in the interview, he goes, "And I am very, very careful with my words." That's what he said. I remember that.
Yeah.
It's like an intellectual chess game almost. Like yeah, in those like debates with people like Kathy Newman, and even just debates in general, you really have to be careful about what you say because the minute you slip up, they can use that against you.
Yeah, but you have to think quick too, because otherwise you've looked like you've lost.
Yeah, you look like you don't know what you're talking about if you don't answer fast enough. Yeah, so you have to kind of be pre-prepared to actually go into those kind of circles to debate.
Right.